Right. Well, hello, everyone. I think we can start this webinar for this evening. Welcome to today's session, Cold Weather EV Tips. My name is Benjamin John. I'm the Climate and Energy Programs Manager for the Georgian Bay Minidoh-Gami Biosphere, and I'll be one of the folks from the Biosphere leading today's session. Also joining me from the Biosphere is Emma Burton, our Climate and Youth Outreach Coordinator, who will be leading all of the tech in the background. So if you're having any issues with Zoom, please let us know because Emma will be able to help you out. Please also know that we will be recording today's session and posting it to our YouTube channel. We want to make this session accessible for those who weren't able to make it this evening, but also offer you the opportunity to review any of the topics that are discussed today. So there'll be a link that's circulated in a follow-up email after the webinar, and that'll also be made available on our website as well. We'd also like to encourage you to use the Q&A tool that Zoom offers. If you have a question at any time throughout the webinar, please put it in there. We do have some time reserved at the end for questions. So if you put your question in that function there, we'll be sure to get to it throughout the session tonight. And before we begin, I'd also like to take this moment to acknowledge the land on which we are on today. The Georgian Bay Biosphere is situated within the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and the Williams Treaty of 1920 and located on Anishinaabeg territory. Our organization under UNESCO acknowledges the rights of Indigenous peoples in this territory and works towards respectful and reciprocal relationships as we are all caretakers of the land. So once again, thank you all for joining us this evening. If it's your first time hearing about the Georgian Bay Minidoh-Gami Biosphere, it is one of 19 UNESCO World Biospheres found here in Canada. Our biosphere in particular stretches 200 kilometers along the eastern coast of Georgian Bay and was designated by UNESCO back in 2004. Our region in particular is ecologically unique as it contains the largest freshwater archipelago on Earth. As an organization, we are a registered charity with an office located in Parry Sound. We rely on grants, partnerships, and donations to carry out a lot of the work in the fields of environmental conservation, climate action, sustainable communities, culture, and as well as education. So within these areas, it's our goal to help inform and educate and provide leadership within these areas as a way to inspire collaborative partnerships for learning, as well as action that can help towards building a balance between humans and nature within our region. If you do enjoy today's webinar, this is part of a larger webinar series that we're hosting on electric vehicles as well as other electric mobility. And we'd like to thank the Mike Brigham Foundation, Lakeland Solutions, the North Bay Parry Sound Health Unit, as well as some of our other partners who have made tonight's session possible. So please be on the lookout for more EV events and webinars coming in the future. We do have 3 more webinars planned in the coming months, and we've got some great speakers lined up for those sessions, including an Intro to E-Bikes webinar from Parry Sound Bikes. And with respect to the remaining EV webinars we have as well too, there's going to be something for everyone. So whether you're an expert, you have some knowledge already, or even just beginning to learn about these types of vehicles, there's going to be something there for everyone. So last week we actually had our first snowfall here in the Parry Sound area, and I know other places of Ontario and parts of Canada have as well. And personally, it got me thinking about starting to put my snow tires on. Those cold winter mornings where we're warming up the vehicle and slippery driving conditions as well. I think these are things that I know a lot of people think about when it comes to winter driving, and when it comes to electric vehicles in particular, there's often some additional concerns that we've heard about how, say, these vehicles perform in the cold and winter, especially when it comes to topics such as charging the vehicle as well as its range. So I'd like to start this session just with a quick yes and no question and ask everyone here, do you think EVs work well in the cold? You should see this question pop up on the screen here, and simply just cast your vote yes or no. All responses here are going to be anonymous. Myself and your other folks in the audience won't be able to see your answers, so I'll just give everyone, maybe another 20 seconds or so just to put their response in there. I'm not so sure if everybody's able to see those poll results, but from what I'm seeing on my end, it's a pretty even split so far. Just a little bit more on the yes, we do feel that there's a concern about EV performance more so than the no. That's I'm glad that we've got um, these responses because I'm sure today's webinar will address some of these concerns. So moving on to our next question, we have one more question here. Um, if you answered yes to that last question, perhaps we can dive a little bit deeper into that and better understand what are some of these concerns that you have. And there we should see that next polling question come up. With this question, you're able to provide or select as many options as you want. There's multiple concerns that you may have here. Perhaps, it's reduced range, slower charging, perhaps the cabin heating impacts on the range, control and stability, or even other concerns as well too. And give everyone again maybe just a couple more seconds, 20 more seconds to put your vote into that poll there. All right. Again, I'm not sure if everybody's able to see those responses, but really the big winners on this question here is that there's a lot of concern about how the cold weather impacts range. What is that cold weather doing to the battery? And I'm really excited then to start introducing our speakers today because I'm confident that we'll be touching on that a little bit today with our session here and some tips and tricks to maximize range and as well as discussing a little bit about EV performance in the cold. So I'm excited to introduce you today to Dave Giles from PoweredEV and Mitch Gregory. So Dave has been involved in the automotive, truck and transport and collision industries for more than 30 years. He currently serves as the president of PoweredEV Training and Consulting. He sits on several boards and works with several OEMs at a factory level for EV production. He started All EV Canada in his driveway, and that was then sold to SAG in 2021 with his three other partners after growing it to a national brand across several dealerships. And he's also been involved with several innovation projects and training aids for technical institutions out of Quebec and doing that across Canada and North America. And Mitch is joining us. Mitch is currently a Master's of Mechanical Engineering student where he is experimentally studying lithium ion cells and high rates of charging in extreme and adverse climates. So he has a wealth of knowledge as well when it comes to how EVs and their batteries are operating in those cold conditions, in those cold temperatures. And Mitch was sharing with us earlier that he was working with a colleague on transforming a Triumph Spitfire to be electric. I hope I got that right, Mitch, but I'll turn it over to you both, Dave and Mitch, and thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks for the intro, Ben. Dave, you're muted. Dave, you're muted. There you go.
There we go. Thank you. If we just get the presentation, I'm going to put this on. Yeah, there we go. Get this off here and reduce this down. And yes, great. This is, well, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's session on preparing your electric vehicle for winter. It's a pretty exciting subject. I'm in Atlantic Canada in Halifax, similar to Mitch here. Mitch will give a quick little intro in a second here, but it is one of the big challenges. Even when we started All EV Canada, one of the big questions that did come up all the time was weather conditions and your EV, especially cold temperatures. And I invited Mitch along because he's actually doing that kind of experimental work dealing with temperatures, and he's got a wealth of knowledge and information which he's going to share this evening with you, as well as I'm going to go through EV talk about the tips and the aspects of winter driving on your EV. I currently drive constantly between Halifax and Quebec City, and then Ottawa, and then to Toronto. And I drive exclusively an EV in those trips. So I'll give some of my experience with that, as well as some of the things that you can do to maximize your range in an EV.
Dave, you'll have to share your screen.
Is it coming up there?
Not yet.
Is it good?
I can see.
Can you see?
Okay. Not yet.
Are you good? Can you see the screen?
Nope.
Make sure it's all working. Okay, so like I said, are we up and running?
Not yet, Dave.
Oh, hang on a second. I don't know why I'm not getting screen share here. Hang on a second. Let me just think it got exited out with the other slide. 1 second here. Let's see. Sorry about that. I'm just gonna redo it again. See if I get this up and go. Are we good?
We're going. Yep.
Sorry about that. I think I'm good. So there we go. So yeah, just going on. Maybe Mitch giving a quick little background onto. I know Ben talked a little bit about it, but maybe just give a real quick brief on your work with some of this thermal management stuff you've been working with.
Sure. I became inspired to look further into EV cold weather operation and also fast charging when I tried to drive a Nissan Leaf, early 2013 one. I borrowed it from All EV. This was a few years ago. And I wanted to drive across the province, and I just didn't have enough range. And when I thought about what the impact of cold weather would have on the car, that made me go, okay, we really have to figure this out, because there's a lot of people that are relying on their cars, and there's a lot of Canada that's going to get really cold every year. So, yeah, and I work in the Renewable Energy Storage Lab, which is a research group here led by Lucas Swan, which works on many different projects. I'm particularly focused on working with 2170 cylindrical cells, which are what's in a Tesla Model 3 or Y, Rivians, many other vehicles. And I'm charging them in less than 10 minutes. And I have temperature sensors inside, and I'm able to control the temperature of the cell to see how it operates. So I'm currently focusing on the fast charging side of things, but I'll swing back to the cold weather work in the future. On the side, I work with the Formula SAE team here at Dell, and we recently completed building a Formula electric car, which was the latest build that I've been part of. But yeah, that's part of it. I've done a lot of work with Dave in the past on the training aid stuff, which is really fun too. But if we talked about all the stuff Dave and I had got up to in the past few years, we'll be here for too long. So why don't we get into the cold talk?
Sounds great. Yes. And in fact, the picture of me up there, I'm actually in Mitch's lab right now.
Yeah.
One of the battery storage labs there.
You can see the Model 3 battery right in front of him.
Cycling. So starting off with a lot of questions that come around, it really depends on your area for where you live and what you're going to experience during different months of the year. Some areas that get extremely cold with very little snow. Other areas will get a lot of snow and not so cold of a climate, as well as we get ice and rain, and that's mostly Atlantic Canada in our area anyways. Down in Halifax we get a lot of ice, a lot of rain, very damp, and it's not as snowy, but we get a lot of slush in that, which can affect range. So it really depends on where you're at, but any of these do affect the range, affect the performance, and affect the vehicle overall. So it's how do we manage that? How do we get around that? How do we maximize our vehicle in these types of conditions? I've actually had people where they would park their electric vehicles over the winter because they're afraid to drive them. They just said, like, the winter's going to be hard on the battery, the cold's going to be hard on the battery. We're not going to get the range we expected. And understandably, these concerns have already been addressed by many manufacturers, and that's why when they're building electric vehicles and designing them, the thermal management properties of these vehicles really comes into play. The aerodynamics and how the cabin is going to be heated and how the batteries are going to be thermally managed, as well as the electronics and everything else, the aspects of the vehicle, and plus safety is a big thing. And I'm going to show a little video in a little bit here, on some of that safety and some of the integrated safety systems within these vehicles. So some of the changes in winter driving from warmer weather driving is charging. Charging is going to be some of the changes are going to happen with that, with the cold temperatures. Obviously, vehicle driving, range of the vehicle, the battery's range. We would take vehicles all the time from Halifax to PEI, Charlottetown, where we had another dealership. I think Mitch did a few of those runs with us, and and how you drove the vehicles, and it was a big challenge as well too. So we're trying to overcome some of these things that we can operate the vehicles in a normal manner, get the maximum range on the vehicle without sacrificing the enjoyability of driving an electric vehicle. So we're going to talk a little bit about the things that you can do with these vehicles in this session. Also, the other thing that comes around is tires. So I'm going to talk a little bit about tires for EVs. I know there's a lot of discussion around that, but we're going to keep it at a high level, but make it very relevant for if you're buying a tires or you're trying to equip your vehicle for for the winter, and what kind of tires to buy, and what kind of tires that are made for your vehicle. As well as we have our vehicle performance and so on, road conditions, visibility. We're going to cover all this in this session today with electric vehicles. In fact, the picture in the background is actually, I should say, these are some of the freak snowfalls that we do get in Halifax, and this was a snowfall we had in one of our dealerships there. So we do still get snow, but mostly rain and ice are two big things in Atlantic Canada. So how does cold weather affect EVs? Is basically cold weather is air is a lot denser, and I don't mean by denser in the sense that just because cold it's dense. There's a lot more moisture in the air. That affects our aerodynamics of the vehicles, which affects range. So as your speed increases with the vehicle, that's also going to affect it. So once again, the moisture in the air, rain, snow, and so on are big factors here. The temperature of the battery, reducing output and input. So as Mitch is going to talk in a second here, charging your battery, if it's extremely cold, it can be a challenge to try and get the kilowatts into the battery, as well as even discharging the battery while driving. So, once again, energy to keep passengers warm and, the climate inside. And we see a lot more heat pumps in vehicles now, increasing that efficiency, increasing that thermal management within the vehicle itself. As well as we have to realize in extremely cold areas, cold does have effect on metals, causing them to shrink and have adverse effects on stress on the vehicle. So these are other concerns and factors, especially with these vehicles being very heavy with their batteries in the lower section. And I always try and be careful of that, because people always say, well, electric vehicles are harder on our roads because of their weight. And in fact, they're really not heavier than some passenger vehicles out there. And the difference with an electric vehicle's weight is that the center of gravity is different than a combustion vehicle. So, and that actually has an advantage on the vehicle, especially in performance in winter driving, winter traction, winter control. So that's one of the advantages, extra weight. So I always like to be careful when, people are talking about, electric vehicle being heavier, causing more damage to the roads, wearing tires out faster. In fact, there's many vehicles that are heavier than comparable electric vehicles in the ICE side, in the internal combustion engine side. Once again, salt and brine mixtures are put on the roads to reduce ice and slipperiness. So once again, these can have effects on vehicles, especially metals in that. One thing about electric vehicles, they're no different in their actual construction than a conventional gas vehicle. So we see the same materials being used and some of the same build in the vehicles, but So once again, we still have salt and issues, and we still have rust and so on. So we're going to talk a little bit about that at the end here. Cracked glass is one of the things. One of the things that we do get a lot is that, especially in some of the Teslas, about cracked windshields, the cold weather on glass and that, how it affects it. So we'll talk a little bit about that, winter wipers and so on, that can cause damage to it, fogging and freezing of glass, and going into tire pressure and traction issues with all-weather tires with EVs, especially in certain areas. Some people like to put all-weather tires on their vehicles, hence because of the weight of the vehicle, they feel that they don't need a snow tire or a winter tire, and they wind up, once again, they may not have the right tire for the application, depending on where you're living and type of winter that you do get. Once again, cold weather affects regeneration, the regen cycle on a vehicle. And, some of the updates I've seen in some vehicles is to address that with regeneration. And because people are saying, if it's really cold out and I'm not getting the regen I'm supposed to get, the vehicle feels heavy and it's hard to slow it down. So some of the updates that we've been seeing on vehicles is addressing that problem. Mitch will talk a little bit about that, especially with the battery thermal management side. And as well, power output. Sometimes when it's really cold out, you might not have the same performance as you would with a warm battery. So once again, another thing that they look at for managing thermal management in a vehicle. And also charging speeds and battery condition as well too. And this will take us into a little bit into what Mitch is going to be talking about with the battery technologies, how thermal affects batteries, and some resources that you can use for looking up your vehicle in thermal different types of thermal conditions.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so what's really happening? Why are we losing range at cold temperatures? Well, the first reason is that lithium-ion batteries have less available energy at colder temperatures. And an example is essentially what's happening is a lithium-ion is going back and forth between the positive and negative terminals on the battery when it's discharging or charging, goes a different direction. But it has to travel through an electrolyte, which is essentially a very salty, high concentration salt liquid. And as you can imagine, traveling through a very thick liquid is hard for the lithium ion, and that's what happens at cold temperatures. Is that solvents become very sluggish, and the ions can't travel across. Now, if you warm the battery back up, you can recover some of that lost energy. It's not really lost, but it's just unavailable at colder temperatures. So there's just less available energy in a battery at cold temperatures. However, you also lose efficiency in some of your heating systems, particularly on heat pumps. They become a little bit less efficient. They still work, and they're better than a resistive heater, but they become less efficient. And you have to use more energy. We can understand. I like my car nice and warm when I hop in it in the winter. That's one of my favorite things about EVs is the preheating. Hopping in with a warm seat, steering wheel, and air is awesome. So, but that does come at a cost. We'll talk about how you can reduce that cost. And then, as Dave mentioned, regen is disabled. That's because what can happen is lithium plating. So that's lithium ions embedding themselves into the electrode. And that is, in many cases, irreversible. So you actually damage the battery when you're trying to charge it at temperatures below zero or at low temperatures. So that's the technical reason why you can't regen, because regen is just charging the battery. And yes, as Dave mentioned, slush on the road, winter tires, denser air increases the rolling resistance, which means you need more power to go up the hill or down the road. And that uses more energy as well. So let's look at the impact that these losses have on the range of vehicles on the grand scheme of things on average. You go next slide, please. So this image here on the right is from Geotab, which is a resource online that has connected to thousands of electric vehicles and has monitored their performance over a range of temperatures. And they've used all different kinds of vehicles, whether it's Teslas, Nissan, Hyundai, almost every EV that's been on the road in Canada has been plotted by them. So you can see there's a wide difference in the 90th percentile and the 10th percentile at a specific temperature, and that's in the vehicle itself and also how it's used. So we'll talk about how you can increase that range. Now, a couple cool, interesting data points. 20 degrees is the best temperature for EVs, around there, maybe a little bit higher than that. I mean, logically, you're not heating it, and you're not cooling the cabin, so you're using a lot less energy. However, when you're cold and it's -20, you can see it up to or more than 53% reduction in range. Now, the best case is much less than that, but it can be very bad at cold temperatures. Oh, we lost Dave. Okay. I will pull up PowerPoint and continue talking. So, sorry about this. Winter driving final 2023. Zoom. Okay. There we go. Share. Can you see? I should probably show the full screen, right? This. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it there, Mitch. Thanks.
Okay, great. Let me just jump back down to where I was. Yeah, the range reduction is significant. You can also notice the high temperature side of things, the AC starts to be quite significant at temperatures above 30 degrees. So that's a high temp. We don't really care so much about that right now because it's snowing out there. So this variability, if you're an owner of a Tesla or a Chevy Bolt, you're going to see something different, and you're also going to see different range as you use it differently. So as you use pre-charging or as you drive harder or slower or whatnot. So let's take a look at the different vehicles and how temperature impacts them. So Recurrent Auto, which is from the States, has done a similar thing to Geotab, but they've broken it down here in a nice graphic that shows some vehicles are much less impacted by others. So vehicles with heat pumps, that would include the latest Tesla Model 3 and Y, as well as the Nissan Leaf, are impacted less. Also, vehicles that are able to recover heat from the motors. Motors are not 100% efficient. They're still even 90% efficient when it's cold out. That 10% loss of energy in the motors can be recovered, or at least some of it, and put into the cabin. And that's what sophisticated cooling systems in some of the newer models can do. But some of the less sophisticated systems, which kind of hurts to say, I'm a Chevy Bolt owner. The Chevy Bolt has a significant hit at I think the most there, 32% is a loss there, which is pretty significant. But even with the Chevy Bolt, from my experience, there are things you can do to reduce that impact. So preconditioning is the biggest one. This is the saving grace to EVs in cold weather. So some advice from Dave actually is to set the charger to finish charging when you need it. And that way, when it's charging, the battery's actually heating itself up, or the charger can be heating it up. And also, don't fully charge all the way up to 80%. Or sorry, don't fully charge. If you only charge up to 80%, then when you start driving, you still have some regen available. And that will keep the battery, it keeps the battery warm. It also can recover that energy and not be as efficient. Now, different vehicles. I was just speaking to a couple owners of a Hyundai and then another Bolt owner. They have different mechanisms to preheat, precondition. So it's different for every vehicle, but most newer vehicles have some sort of feature, whether it's a remote start or an app that you can set, or just a timer that you can set on the car to charge or preheat to a certain time. So it is different for different vehicles, but this can essentially what it does is it allows you to take the power from the grid and put that into to heat the cabin and also heat the battery. So like I said earlier, you lose that energy, lose that access to that energy when the battery's cold, while you regain that if you can preheat before you go somewhere. Now, if you think about it from your daily trip point of view, people are going to have very different trips, right? Personally, I can preheat from about half of the destinations I go to, but in many cases I don't have that option, and that's when the car is maybe a bit colder and I don't preheat, so I can save the energy in the battery. Yeah. So pass it off to Dave next, and
Sure.
he's going to talk a bit about safety and many other features of EV driving.
I was gonna say, I try and get into. I'm just trying to get. I think you might be able to do it, but I was gonna try and control it. Ben, can you just give me a host as well? Back again. I was gonna put myself back into the.
Not sure if this link is here. Let me see if I can.
I think I got it.
Dave, you should have co-host abilities.
Just gonna put myself back into the queue. Okay, sorry about that. I just want to put us because I have more control on my side, especially with a couple of these upcoming slides. I think I'm back in. Great. Thank you very much. So that was great, Mitch. Definitely preheating, preconditioning is a big thing. It's all about anytime you're doing anything with EVs, especially winter cold driving, is all about the battery temperature wise, keeping it and maintained in the range, creating strategies within your overnight charging, or even doing a bit of a top up, even though you don't like charging every night, but you do have very cold temperatures, even knocking it down to a level 1 or moving your amps down to like even 8-10 amps for overnight charging on your level 2. A lot of the cars are very controllable that way. So, definitely there's a lot of strategies that you can do. And this maximizes range big time, because you got to remember, if you start off in the morning with a very cold battery, the mentality or the logic of the vehicle is to protect the battery at all costs. So that means a lot of energy will be used to get that battery up to temperature. So it's better to use a charging temperature or charging energy from your home or charging station to do it rather than the battery, because obviously you're going to sacrifice range in that area. So and the other thing that comes up is about charging safety. Some of the things that comes up with charging safety is charging in cold temperatures. Some of the things that happens with when we're into charging with extremely wet conditions and so on. We have I have a little video that I do play, but it doesn't want to come up. I don't know why it's not linking. But anyways, I can definitely, when we post this to YouTube, there'll be the link and it'll show. And essentially what I do is I take a level 2 240 volt charger, fully powered. I plug it into a Mach-E. And what I do is after it starts charging, I unplug the charge connector and I dump it in a bucket of water. So I actually put the charge head in a bucket of water to show how the system is isolated from the vehicle, from the charge box on the wall of this 240 volt, 32 amp, I believe it was, connector. And it shows that how the pilot and proximity sensors within these charge connectors shut off instantly. And then I dump the head of the charge cable into the bucket of water. I remove the charge head from that bucket of water and I plug it right back into the vehicle, and the vehicle starts charging again. And then I take the bucket of water and I dump it over that charge connector. And it's charging. And it shows that that the vehicle manufacturers have put in scenarios that they know the vehicle will be protected. It has shut down GFI in the charge box, has isolation circuits which will activate within 250 milliseconds if it detects an isolation issue within the charging or high voltage side of things. So once again, making it very, very safe when you're charging in the rain and stuff. So if you're standing in a puddle, you could be up to your knees in water and and plug in a vehicle. And even at that point, the battery is also isolated from the vehicle chassis. Which is another big thing that is another myth about the vehicles, because also I do first responders training and consulting. And one of the things, you could grab the terminal of the battery itself, the high voltage battery, the positive terminal of the battery, and touch the chassis of the vehicle. There is no connection from the ground to the chassis. That battery is completely isolated from the vehicle itself. And even if the ground happened to be damaged in an accident touching that battery, what happens, it would blow the fuses, the contactors won't turn on. It's like there's so many other redundant safety systems on these vehicles that prevents injury and so on. Like I said, the engineers design electric vehicles to fail. They go backwards. They see all the scenarios that can happen and they move backwards. And that goes to battery technology as well. It's not that they haven't tested these things in -40, -50 degree temperatures and +60, +80 degree temperatures. It's extreme. They go to the extremes and then they work their way back. That's why battery warranties on cars are so long, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, 200,000 kilometers. On my vehicle, I just got an update on my vehicle. They have extended the warranty on my battery by another 10,000 kilometers, like just because they know that these batteries can take the abuse that's out there, and they know how to manage it, especially with some of these new systems and a lot of the technology, not just in the batteries but also in the thermal management side of things. So one thing is, we have to understand, in our cars themselves and what happens within our vehicles and preparing our vehicles is that basically you get frost inside and outside the glass. One thing we do need to know is that heat moves from hot to cold, so it's attracted. So, when you're starting to put your heat on inside the vehicle, it gets attracted to the cold windshield. And, and of course, at that time, that heat energy and the BTUs of that energy can be attracted into the glass, and which can cause the glass to, in some cases, crack. And other things like that. That's why I say never pour hot water on a windshield. You see people talking about using spray bottles and so on. But once again, it's like, we need to be able to keep the humidity inside the vehicle away from that glass itself. So outside solution, outside the glass, once again, there's products that can be put into your washer bottle that will help prevent the frost on the outside of glass. But like I said, don't ever pour hot water on a windshield. A lot of these glass, and this was my point I was going to make, a lot of new cars, it's very surprising how thin that glass is on a windshield and how strong it is. You're talking glass that's now 4 millimeters thick. Which is very, very thin for a windshield, but the way it's designed and engineered, it's structural as well as it's extremely strong. If you see the Teslas with their roof glass and so on, they look like they're going to be super heavy. We've taken out lots of roof glass from some of these cars, and when it's intimidating. You think it's going to be very heavy. You call a couple people over, and it weighs about 15 pounds. So it's like, it all comes down to the engineering side of things. It's the concave of the glass and the construction of it. But the thing is, it still can break, and that's the point I'm going to make. Your early windshields, very thick, very heavy. Early or later windshields in modern vehicles, very different technology in the glass themselves. And this gets me into a little bit into so go back here, air conditioning. One of the services that comes up all the time about electric vehicles is about the thermal management, heat pumps, and so on, but nobody thinks about air conditioning in the wintertime, especially in cold climates. And air conditioning actually serves various functions within an electric vehicle. In fact, it can even shut down your vehicle during charging if there's a problem with the air conditioning systems, because even in really cold weather, as you're charging the vehicle, the battery is going to start getting warm. And part of the thermal management system is to remove some of that heat and maintain, as Mitch was saying, that ideal temperature of that battery to maximize how fast the battery can charge and how that battery will perform. So, so once again, even before winter, you're putting your tires on the vehicle, you're getting it prepared, you're swapping out your fluid and your washer fluid, you're doing your regular vehicle checkovers, your brake caliper service, underbelly pan service, and stuff like that, which I'll talk about in a second. Is one thing you should do is make sure that the air conditioning is functioning properly. Because, as I mentioned earlier, the humidity inside a vehicle, as you go inside and out of your vehicle, you're carrying snow, you're carrying slush, it gets inside your vehicle, you turn the heaters on, the heaters melt that slush and water, turn it into vapor, evaporates into the wind, into the vehicle. And of course, the outside of the vehicle is very cold, the glass is very cold. And what happens now, that warm, dense, moist air gets attracted to the windshield and freezes to the windshield. So this is how you get frost on the inside of your windshield. Part of the cycle of the air conditioning and defrost is to act as a dehumidifier. But if your air conditioning system's not performing well, then you're going to have visibility issues. But at the same time, you're also going to have thermal management issues within your battery, and you don't think that the cold weather, would be able to overcome that. But inside the modules, they're what we call an IP67. They're sealed. Most of these batteries are sealed. So basically what's happening is that they have to be able to get rid of their heat somehow while driving, even minus 20-degree weather. When you're accelerating that vehicle, those batteries are discharging. They have to get rid of the heat somehow. So part of the thermal management system and having the air conditioning system operational is very critical as well. And also into, like I mentioned, is charging. Maybe not just even the driving side, but even charging. And you notice that when you go to a DCFC, a direct current fast charger, or supercharger, and you notice that you're not getting the kilowatts into your vehicle as you typically would. And once again, it could be coming back from the thermal management system. So I recommend to people, make sure the leaves are out of your air intakes for the front of the vehicle. Make sure the radiators, if it's a liquid cooled system, they're free and clear. And if it's running a heat pump with chillers in the vehicle, which most of them do, is make sure that they're working properly and they're clear and free of any debris, because even those things can affect the vehicle's range and performance in the wintertime. And it comes down to air conditioning. Sounds really funny, but it's one of the aspects about EVs in the winter. The other thing is that a lot of electric vehicles don't have the thermal losses from the combustion as a gas vehicle does. So that means that under the hood it doesn't get hot, and that means snow and ice will build up on the hoods of these vehicles, and causes, once again, components to freeze. It can create visibility issues. So once again, keeping your vehicle properly waxed, keep it cleared in the wintertime, because like I said, I drive an electric vehicle and it's a frunk in the front of it, and it doesn't get warm at all. So I get snow buildup on my hood and it doesn't melt off as it would in an ice vehicle. And even other vehicles like the Bolt and Konas and so on that do have what we call a stacked EV drive system, they don't produce very much heat under the hood. So once again, you wind up with a lot of buildup of ice and snow on top of the hood. So it's always good to keep it cleared, but also, how do you prevent it? Keep it well waxed, and clear it off when it does, when it starts to get adverse. Don't drive around with the snow on the hood thinking that the first stoplight, when you hit the brakes, it's all going to slide off. Not on an EV. On a gas, maybe, but not on an EV. So some of the things that you can do is cleaning, waxing, and coating before the winter hits. Some people do ceramic coating and so on. There's various different products out there, even just a regular wax and wash. Just make sure that the vehicle is clear, that can keep the snow and ice from building up on it. Protecting rubbers and charge doors, which is very critical. I see that's the big issue, is charge doors. Where they locate these charge doors, some cars are right in the front. So they're in direct contact with the elements and so on. And also, when you go to charge and you can't get that door open, and you wind up damaging it. And some of these charge doors, the way the switches work is that if you force that door open and you have now access to that port, it may not allow the charger to engage because it doesn't think that the charge door is actually open. So once again, it's important to keep these charge doors clear and free of snow. There's products out there that talk about when you're charging to protect the charge connector, but when you're driving, it's also important to keep that charge door protected as well from these elements from freezing up. So same as goes to headlights and so on. And this is no different than gas-powered vehicles. So, a lot of vehicles have turned to headlights, LED lighting, and so on. Problem with these types of lighting systems, they don't produce heat, so it's hard to keep them clear. So once again, it's important to keep the lenses, clear of the ability to get buildup. Now, when a lens is built on your vehicle and and you're driving with it, there's actually a special coating on it to prevent water and ice from attaching itself to the lens. But over time, you get rocks and so on that get chipped into that plastic cover, that lens, and then now ice and that can build up on it without the ability for the light to actually be able to melt that snow. So I've even seen some vehicles now that come with heated headlights. So where there's a function where it sees reduced visibility, especially with ADAS systems, and it can actually help, reduce the buildup of that ice on the lenses. But if you do find that's a problem with your vehicle, PAM cooking spray, simple, easy, works well, doesn't damage the plastic, which is great. In other ways, it's just even waxing the headlights. I find some waxes though can cause some yellowing on it. Then you have to keep doing it over and over. But once again, headlights, high intensity discharge lights, don't have this issue because they produce a lot of heat. So some of these lights that produce very high intense lighting is once again, they don't have this type of issue. And one thing is you got to remember too is that when you do EV, when you're talking about electric vehicles and you're talking about the maintenance and about different aspects about the electric vehicles, when ICE owners, or if you own a gas-powered vehicle, you typically take your vehicle in to have it serviced because you want to keep the vehicle reliable and you want to keep the longevity of the vehicle. Oil changes are important, changing the drive belts, doing those coolant services and the filters for the engine and so on, spark plugs and whatever, because you want them reliable. Their fuel efficiency depends on how well the engine can breathe and combust that fuel. And also you want to be able to keep that vehicle living a lot longer, due to warranty and wear and tear on the vehicle. So your oil changes become important and so on. Electric vehicles are a little different. Electric vehicles in the experience we've had with hundreds of customers, electric vehicles, they know their vehicles are reliable. They know they'll start in extreme temperatures, and they know there's less than 40 moving parts on most of these cars. So, the longevity is obvious. Some of the batteries will do about 1,500 cycles on a battery. So if you got a car that's doing 400 kilometers at 1,500 cycles, the battery will definitely last the car. So they know that. Electric vehicle owners know that. If you own an electric vehicle, you're not worried about it not starting, and you're not worried about it, not lasting. But what you are worried about is efficiency and range. So the efficiency of the vehicle, what kilowatt hours am I going to get per 100 kilometers? How far am I going to go? And the minute you notice that you're out, if every day it takes 20 kilometers to do this range, and in cold weather it takes 35 kilometers to do this range, and all of a sudden now it's taking 25 in warmer weather and it's taking 40 in colder weather, then you're like, there's something going on with my vehicle, and now you want to know what that is. And and there's factors that can affect that range that you can actually help prevent from happening, whether cold or warmer temperatures. But anybody that we dealt with that comes back and says, hey, we lost some range on our vehicle, we're not getting as efficient, can you do a battery check on my vehicle? Can you do a degradation check on it? I think there's something wrong with the vehicle. And I say, hang on a second, before we do that, let's take a look at your car. Let's take a look at your tires, the wear, the alignment, the suspension, the brakes. All these things have factors on the vehicle that can affect that range. So some of the things that are similar between ICE and EVs. So some of the, because these are still cars. Electric vehicles are still cars. In some cases, they have a sister vehicle that's actually, a gas vehicle to an electric vehicle. So these are some of the things that are still relevant and the same right across the board. Maintenance. This is another big area that we talk about. Electric vehicles are not free from maintenance. They just have different types of maintenance. A lot of electric vehicles have a lot of underbelly pans underneath them. So once again, is keeping them clean and free of debris. These underbelly pans aren't found a lot on gas-powered vehicles because of exhaust and dry shafts and so on, fuel systems and that. So, but EVs are typically covered completely underneath. So once again, keeping them clean. So when you go in for your tire change, have them, take a look underneath those belly pans, and whether it's a Tesla, a Bolt, a Leaf, a Kona, inspect them, make sure they're not built up, make sure they're secure. Because they do, in some cases, I've had them where they've had probably about 10 pounds of rocks and dirt underneath of them. Alignments also, one thing about EVs is keeping them straight. Alignment that's out can definitely affect range, especially in the winter, and handling as well. So most manufacturers are around 22,000 kilometers or once a year. Gas-powered vehicles, people do them when they notice they had a suspension part removed or a steering part removed and replaced. EVs, there should be a regular maintenance. It will affect range. It can affect the efficiency. So you want to make sure that that vehicle is rolling as straight as possible down the road. One, for tire wear. Two, for to maximize that range on the vehicle. And also, don't forget about the 12-volt charging system, the 12-volt battery in the electric vehicle. These are a lot smaller. The 12-volt battery actually controls the high voltage system. And in cold temperatures, if that 12-volt battery is weak and can't turn on the contactors, then you're not, even though your high voltage battery is fully charged, that vehicle will not start and cannot drive. The 12-volt system is part of the safety system, but also in charge of the control side of the high voltage. So it's critical to make sure you still do that checks on your 12-volt battery. When you go in for your tire changeover, you're going in for winter service, make sure they really test those batteries. Some of them are AGM, some of them are flooded lead acid, like this Tesla in front of me here. And they're easy to test, and a lot of shops can do that, with their battery testers. And if it comes out as a fail or a moderate, and then definitely replace it, even though it might not be showing signs. Once that cold temperature hits, it's going to do the same thing as on a gas-powered vehicle. You'll have performance issues in starting your vehicle and so on. So once again, 12-volt batteries are a critical part of the high voltage system on an electric vehicle. Brake caliper service should be done more often than people expect. This is a little clip here just on a vehicle that has 16,000 kilometers on it, and they look pretty good. Everything looks good, but because of the regen system on an electric vehicle, the sliders in that can seize up because the brakes aren't used as much. And because of that, you could have dragging brakes, and which will cause performance issues. So in this vehicle here, you can see very clearly that these pins are supposed to slide very freely. They work on, very little pressure, spring back pressure. And, it took some force for me to do it. Obviously, the calipers weren't doing it. And the pins themselves weren't doing their job either. And what was happening was it was causing the brakes to drag, causing efficiency issues. So once again, typically we don't see that on ICE vehicles, even though it's a maintenance requirement on an ICE car. But because the brakes are being used all the time, they don't get the same low mileage seizing or sticking of those brake parts. So they need to be serviced, especially if you're in a high salt area. I had a Tesla owner come into the shop, and he was told when he first bought the car back in 2015, he never had to do brakes on the car because he'll never go through a set of brakes. Came into our shop. It was in, we're in Nova Scotia, so we have yearly inspections, and he brought it in, and the calipers failed because they were so corroded inside that the brake pads and the backing plate of the brake pads had actually eaten away because of the difference between the metal and the aluminum had eaten away into the caliper. And it was a $4,000 job at the end of the day on that car. So and he was like, if he had done the maintenance on the brakes, the brake caliper service, he would have never had that problem. So, once again, these are some of the things that are important for EV service, and especially when driving throughout the year. So tires, just want to go quickly through tires. Once again, all tires are not the same. I like to put that, I see on forums all the time where people are talking about winter tires for their EVs and so on. You got to remember your EV is different in some aspects of with its tires. Some EVs run higher tire pressures. They require heavier loads because the car's center of gravity is lower. Sizing is pretty standard, between an ICE and an EV. But from there, everything changes. So, your load index on the tire, your tire pressures, and you got to make sure you're running the right tire. You cannot, if your door tag on your B pillar of your vehicle says that this vehicle takes 45 psi of air, and you put a tire on it and it's only rated for 40 psi, that tire is not designed for your vehicle. And some people like to say, well, I just run a little bit lower pressure anyways. I like the ride in that. You have just altered the characteristics of handling, stopping, acceleration, cornering of that vehicle. And, because you're running that lower tire pressure. Also, as a tire is with less air in it, it's actually a little smaller, which means that it spins, with more heat. You got more friction on the road with the tire itself. So it can cause other problems as well too. So it's really important when you're selecting your winter tire to make sure you have the correct tire. And not to give you guys a whole overview on tire training, but tires have numbers on them, and the number there on the left shows me a 205, 55, 16. 205 is basically the width of the tire. 55 is the profile. So the higher the number, the taller the tire. The lower the number, the shorter the tire, in a quick high level overview of that number. And 16 on the side there is the rim. But there's another number that's really important, is the load index number. And there's charts for it. So if I look at that one, it's 91. So that means that tire is capable of 1,356 pounds. So once again, so that means that if I have 4 tires on the vehicle, that means that these tires can carry a total of 5424 pounds. And sorry, I'm using pounds here, but that's how these charts work. But if I go to the door tag on the vehicle, which is on the B pillar, you'll see these GAWR for their weight, and it gives me a total there. So if I take the front and rear, it equals 5,248 pounds. So with the load index on that tire of 91, that means my tires are capable of carrying the weight of this vehicle safely. But if I had a load index that was a lot lower, like a 76, then these tires would not be acceptable for this vehicle. And part of that load indexing is also the capacity and pressure as well that tire can carry as well too. So some numbers that are very important. Like I said, this is recorded, so if you miss what I just said, you can play it back. But definitely, when you're asking for tires, if the tire pressure has to match the tire pressure or exceed the tire pressure on that tire to be applicable to your vehicle. And this applies to ICE vehicles as well too. So just don't take the number on the side 205, 55, 16 and think it applies to all cars. There's other factors that play a role for proper tires on a vehicle. And EV tires that we talk about for when we talk about EV tires, there is EV tires out there, and especially for winter tires now, you're seeing more and more of them. We're looking at rolling resistance, lateral movement in the sidewalls, obviously the tread design for grip, the efficiency. Once again, you want to have a good efficient tire when you put it on, so making sure it's the right tire for your vehicle, make sure the load index is correct. Tread design, for that vehicle. Some treads are very aggressive and can cause codes on some electric vehicles and even ICE vehicles as well. And also maintenance. Make sure you keep those tires rotated. That's a big thing as well. If it's not a staggered wheel, which means bigger wheels on the back, smaller wheels on the front, make sure you rotate those tires. Make sure you do them. In fact, a lot of the manufacturers even recommend 10,000 kilometers for tire rotation on the EVs. And, so once again, because you want to maximize the efficiency of the tire, some tires have foam inside them. Winter tires, it's not really necessary to have the foam inside. The foam is a sound deadening for that tire. But once again, it comes down to cost and, how quiet and what kind of money you want to spend on the tires. But as long as you have the right things when going in buying tires, is making sure you have the proper load, you have the proper size on the tire, and and make sure it's an efficient tire designed for the maximum efficiency on your vehicle for that range. One thing, I'm not going to spend much time on this here, but people talk about nitrogen tires. Nitrogen, I put this up here because there is a lot of controversy over nitrogen, especially under the Tread Act, which is something that happened back in 2000 with Ford and Firestone. But nitrogen came about. But nitrogen is great because it doesn't fluctuate with temperatures because it's very dry. But the problem is how it's installed is critical. So if a shop is doing nitrogen or offering nitrogen, make sure they have a nitrogen purity gauge when they're installing your tires that you can validate and so on. Because once again, if you're under 90, we breathe 78% nitrogen anyways, and we only have 21% oxygen. But if they don't have a nitrogen purity gauge, and if you're not getting in at least 99%, I'm saying at least 99% purity in nitrogen, you're wasting your money. So it's not going to really have any benefit at all. But if they do have that, you do get some benefits with nitrogen, in that aspect. People do ask about undercoating their electric vehicles. Once again, that's a big controversial issue. It comes down to who's doing the undercoating, how it's being applied. Typically EV service technicians, most dealerships do undercoat electric vehicles, usually when they're brand new. They'll offer it as a back end service when you buy the vehicle. But once again, it's proper application, understanding where to put the product, spraying high voltage cables and electronic components and so on. It's going to do no benefit. And if the product penetrates into a component and causes its failure, it's not going to void the entire warranty on the car. It will void the component that's failed because of that product. So that's why it's important that somebody that's doing undercoating on an electric vehicle is applying it properly and applying it to areas that need it. As a regular gasoline vehicle would, just like a gasoline vehicle, I'm not going to spray the exhaust with undercoating product. It's pointless and dangerous too. So same as EVs, spraying high voltage battery compartments or cables or connections, it's pointless. It's not necessary. So but doing rocker panels and subframes and all that, it's also important as well too. So and that's also in product wise, is product, whatever, some products are more aggressive than others. The only thing I gotta say about products, if you are getting someone to spray and rust protection on your vehicle, make sure that product does not skew the color of the cables and so on. So if you're spraying a product and it's dark in color and some of it gets on the orange cables by accident, make sure they're cleared off, because nothing's worse than first responder or technician not seeing that bright orange cable and not knowing it's a high voltage. It can carry high voltage, and and once again, it could cause damage with the vehicle. There is a lot of redundant safety systems, so it's still pretty safe, but it's not necessary to have that. Okay, so anyways, we're at the end of our presentation. If anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and thanks, Mitch, as well too. We do have a couple questions that have come my way through the session, and I just want to say thanks as well for all those tips and tricks. I think there's also a lot of good tips and tricks too for even those that still have a nice vehicle, and as for those that are still looking and considering an EV as our next purchase. I think there's a lot of valuable takeaways there for us too. But yeah, as people put some questions up in that chat, I've got two questions here. And maybe Dave, you can answer the first one.
Sure.
The first one is as a little bit of a lead in. It says we've talked a little bit about how EVs are losing some range in the cold weathers too. And, I think obviously that's really good information to have too. But to contextualize that, are ICE vehicles at all losing range in the cold weather temperatures as well too? How does that compare if we're seeing, say, a 32% loss in the Bolt, for example? Are we seeing maybe a 15% loss in a similar style ICE vehicle? And, you know, trying to think of that big picture, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. ICE vehicles lose a lot of range as well too. A lot of times, there's a difference between an EV and an ICE vehicle. People watch that range indicator, that percentage, and that becomes everything to them. So whereas an ICE vehicle owner, I asked this before I go, what's your DTA distance, or sorry, DTE, distance to empty? They go, no idea. They didn't even know there was one there.
Yeah.
And you got to remember that a nice vehicle in best conditions is only about 37% efficient. 1 gallon of gasoline holds 33 kilowatt hours of energy. And some of our cars are only 60, kilowatt hours of energy. And you got a gasoline car that's holding like, 15, 20 gallons of fuel. And but they're going the same range as an electric vehicle. Like, when you're talking 400 kilometers on an electric vehicle running, let's say, for example, a 80 kilowatt hour battery, and you have a gasoline vehicle with 20 gallons of fuel, that's, that each gallon is good for about 33 kilowatt hours of energy going, the same distance. And, it really speaks to how much waste there is in combustion, not
Yeah.
including CO2 and the heat energy loss. Now,
Yeah.
the advantage a gasoline engine does have is that thermal energy that is lost can be used to heat the cabin, keep the snow off the hood, as I mentioned earlier. But it's a lot of wasted energy into our environment and emissions as well too. So
I'd say it doesn't have as much impact on an ICE vehicle because of that point that
yeah,
you can use so much of that heat. EVs lose range because of a number of factors. One of them being it needs to heat the cabin. That's not there with an ICE engine, right? But all the denser air, the slush, the rolling resistance of big meaty winter tires, those are the ones that are going to lose the ICE engine. The engine may run less efficient as well
yeah.
during startup, but it's also getting denser air. It's lots of factors, but
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think it's good that just to contextualize it, for example, to know that, the ICE vehicles aren't at 0% losses in the winter either, right? Like there is
yeah, you're
some
wasting more.
small waste as well that's happening
Yeah.
too.
I'm sorry,
And
before you move on there, the effect on a car with a very large battery, like long range vehicles, let's say a Model S with the largest battery, is gonna feel that loss a lot less than a shorter range vehicle would. So much closer to the loss that you might feel in a gas car. It's not the same, but if you still have 330 kilometers of range in the middle of winter, because you just have that big a battery, you don't feel it nearly as much.
Yeah. And we always used to say, people that were buying an electric, this is a good tip. If you are looking at an electric vehicle, buy the biggest battery that you can afford in the vehicle. So, sometimes people will reduce their, the cost of the vehicles based on the battery size, essentially. So if you're doing a lot of long distance driving, don't try to, skimp out on the small. It's just like a gasoline vehicle. If I can buy a car that has a 10-gallon gas tank compared to a car that has a 40-gallon gas tank, obviously I'm going to go a lot further than the 10-gallon gas tank. So, same as an electric vehicle, the battery size is everything to that cost. And like Mitch says, if you're only traveling 200 kilometers a day, and your car in the summertime gets 450 kilometers, and in the wintertime it gets 350 kilometers, you're not going to notice that. But if your car's only getting 350 kilometers and you're traveling 200 kilometers a day, you're going to have to be charging a little bit more often, and so on. So you'll feel that a little bit more, and that range anxiety starts to kick in. So once again, and that's where a lot of the cost comes into these cars, is within the battery technology, the size of the battery, and so on.
perfect. Yeah, and just in the interest of time, I do have one more question, so we'll
Sure.
leave it to one more question. And we do have Dave's contact information here on the screen. So if there are any more questions, please feel free to reach out. But just to wrap things up, maybe this is a question for you, Mitch, perhaps, given the research and the experiments that you've done. Again, when we were talking about charging in these cold temperatures earlier, I feel that that scenario was perhaps largely associated with at-home charging. But how might this say compare if we're at, a fast charger out on, the 400 or the 401 or something, for example, if we're getting a charge in say 30 minutes, typically in the summertime at, one of these stations, are we seeing really much of a noticeable difference in cold weather at one of these fast chargers in the winter?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and it does have a massive impact. It may be -10 degrees outside, but your battery may be 20 degrees or
Yeah.
even 15 or even down to 10. And those temperatures, the battery will accept very high charge rates, particularly the higher you are. If you're up to 40 degrees Celsius, if you're able to precondition the battery up to that very warm temperature, then you have very little effect at all. Even though it's very cold outside, it will accept the charge. However, if you're not able to precondition your battery, and before you go to a charge, it will charge just like you'll be on a DC fast charger. It will be charging like you're charging at home because it's spending all of its time. Really, it's just heating it and waiting for it to get to a certain temperature before it can hit it. Now certain vehicles are able to do that better than others. For example, on a Tesla, if you say I'm navigating to a supercharger, it will, and you can precondition it, and it will warm the battery up. I'm not sure if what it will do with -10 degrees, but I know for say if it's even if it's 10 degrees outside, it'll heat it up to well over 30 degrees, and then it can really accept a fast charge quite quickly. Other vehicles, for example, a Chevy Bolt, I do not know how I would heat it up before fast charging. Um, there doesn't seem to be an option for that, so I'm gonna actually have to look into that. It's a good question. I suppose though that once you were to connect, it would initiate the heating. Once it got to a right temperature, it
Yeah.
would then fast charge, and then while you're fast charging it, I tell you from experience, it will heat itself up quite well. It's a really good heater when you fast charge.
Yeah. Some
So
some
it
of the
sounds
some of the things on the bolts we used to do is we used to floor the cars, like really work them in very
Yeah,
cold. I
that's
was
a
at
great
one
point.
six and
That's how I
trying
would do it.
yeah, trying
Sounds fun.
and then as a quick tip for home, if you do have that capability, what Mitch was talking about is typically Tesla. But if you do have that and you don't go to DCFCs, I found a DCFC that's just outside of my area. And when I'm going home, I'm low on charge, it's very cold. I actually punch in that destination. It starts pre-charging, thinking I'm going to the supercharger, but in fact, I'm just going home. So it warms that battery up, and then I can plug in my home charger, especially if I'm only going to be home for a couple hours. So I want to get as much charge into it before I leave again. So you can fool
Good point.
around with things like that. And if you have any questions, as Ben said, definitely shoot me an email or a text. I'd love to take your questions as well, especially things about some of the strategies with your own vehicle that you may have, or if you're looking at buying an electric vehicle or you're sourcing an electric vehicle. Definitely love helping out people pick out cars. I don't sell cars, so I'm gonna put a disclaimer there. I don't know. I don't talk about
Sure.
pricing or anything, but I definitely would help out with some of the knowledge I have with EVs and so on.
Well, appreciate both Dave and Mitch for all of your time and expertise. Dave, I think that's a great way to wrap things up. So really appreciate that. Again, feel free to reach out to myself or Dave. We'd be happy to answer any of the questions that you might have. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Again, this will be available on our YouTube channel, so you're welcome to review it again at a later date. And stay safe. I believe it's snowing again out there, so what a perfect way to finish this off. Thanks everybody, and thanks Dave and
Great.
Mitch.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Nice to meet
everyone.
you.
Thank you.